Hi, I'm Jay, and I'm going to be talking about David Foster Wallace. So, David Foster Wallace was born on February 21st, 1962, in Ithaca, New York, to his parents Sally Jean Wallace and James Donald Wallace. Wallace lived most of his childhood growing up in Urbana, Illinois, with his parents and younger sister Amy. Wallace and his sister grew up in a strict academic household and were expected to put most of their focus on their studies throughout the day. When Wallace objected to some of the strict restrictions put on him by his parents, his father actually encouraged him to write a intra-family memo, and this automatically sparked a love for writing for Wallace in his early childhood. Most of the reason as to why his parents were so strict that Wallace closely focused on academics was due to the fact that his parents were actually both college professors. His father was a philosophy professor at University of Illinois, and his mother worked at Parkland College as an English professor. Wallace was very bright and found success academically from a very young age, and this success caused him to initially actually look into following his father's footsteps by becoming a philosophy professor. Wallace also found success athletically. After starting tennis in middle school, he quickly became a regionally ranked player and often drove long distances for his matches. However, he took most of these trips by himself, and without any adult supervision, it allowed him to easily get involved with drugs and alcohol, which became quick coping mechanisms for his intense self loathing and other mental health issues, which he started to suffer from very early on in life. After his high school years, Wallace attended Amherst College, where he double majored in English and philosophy. Throughout college, he struggled consistently with depression, which ultimately led him to leave his sophomore year and return home for a short period of time, where he went to some therapy sessions and then later returned to school. He continued to struggle consistently with depression until after his graduation in 1985. He was admitted to a psychiatric unit where he was diagnosed with clinical depression and was finally prescribed antidepressants. Through his early struggle with mental illness, he wrote one of his first pieces called Richard Taylor's Fatalism and the Semantics of Physical Modality as his philosophy thesis, which he later received the Gail Kennedy Memorial Prize for. And for his English thesis, he wrote The Great Ohio Desert, which eventually was published as his very first novel titled Broom of the System. After this time at Amherst, Wallace was accepted into University of Arizona to pursue his master's in creative writing, which he completed in 1987. And after his time at University of Arizona, he enrolled in a PhD program at Harvard University in philosophy, although he never completed his doctoral work due to his mental health issues. While still in school, Wallace published his first short story in 1984 called The Planet Trilithon as It Stands in Relation to the Bad Thing. He then continued writing short stories, many of which were included in his first short story collection, which was published in 1989. The same year his collection of short stories was published, he actually attempted to kill himself for the first time by attempting to overdose on medication, which later resulted in him being admitted to McLean Hospital in Boston, in a facility for people specifically struggling with depression and alcoholism. Although he beat addiction, he found himself unable to write consistently without being numbed by drugs and alcohol and other substances. And he was later advised not to rejoin Harvard after being told that he would be dead by 30 if he did not stay away from addictive substances, and it was thought that he would go back to these things if he had the high pressure academic surroundings. Um, After being released from McLean, he was referred to a halfway house in Massachusetts where he experienced a noticeable improvement in his condition. After leaving the halfway house, he moved to Syracuse, New York, where he started writing several short stories and a novel which retold his experiences at the halfway house. This novel actually turned into his best-selling novel called Infinite Jest. In 1991, he started working at Emerson College in Boston as an adjunct professor of literature, and then in 1993 he moved and started teaching at Illinois State University, where he worked in the English department. The same year, his short story Rabbit Resurrected was published, and he submitted his very first draft of Infinite Jest, which was then published in February of 1996. He then, in 2002, moved to Claremont, California, where he became a professor at Pomona College, where he was able to continue writing while teaching because he had a very, very light course schedule. He only taught 1 to 2 classes, and this allowed him to continue writing. Throughout 2003 to 2005, he wrote several other stories and essays, one of which was a collection of short stories called Oblivion Stories, which was listed as a 2004 New York Times Notable Book of the Year. And although Wallace found extreme success in his written works, he still suffered from severe depression, and after taking antidepressants for so long, he started to experience significant side effects from them, and he actually decided to stop taking his medication. And he then turned to other substances in order to help alleviate the depression, and which eventually, in the end, he was unable to withstand the weight of his depression any longer, and this prompted him to end his life on September 12th, 2008. And before he committed suicide, he actually wrote a 2-page suicide note and arranged a manuscript for his last unfinished novel, titled The Pale King. And then he hung himself from a rafter. And in 2011, his unfinished novel, The Pale King, was actually published by his longtime editor, Michael Peach. And this novel exemplified the talented writer which Wallace was, and it was shown by being nominated as one of the 3 finalists for the 2012 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. And although Wallace lost his battle with depression, he will still be remembered as one of America's finest short story writers. Thank you.